no one ever gets a perfect score on the bar exam. So, everyone fails to some extent. So what you want to do is try to fail less over time. That's what passers do. They just fail less.
Hi, everyone. My name is Doreen Benjamin. I started a podcast and YouTube called Before You Take the LSAT, which is not just about the LSAT. But if you know anyone studying, you're welcome to send them my way. I'm happy to help them. But basically, I started it while I was a 2L at Columbia because I wanted more information as a first generation American professional. I just felt like there could be more information and make it easier to figure it out. So this is the first in a series of Before You Take the Bar, and we're very excited about having Brian on as a guest. Brian is the founder of a website called Make This Your Last Time, which I believe many of you are familiar with. He created Magic Sheets, which I think he's best known for Magic Sheets. Is that right, Brian?
That is correct.
Yeah, he created Magic Sheets, which are condensed outlines. Many people have used it to help them pass the bar. And he's spoken to thousands of students, helped them in their process of passing the bar.
When I heard about your podcast, I was pretty excited to join. It resonated with me just because I kind of have a similar story as yours as well. Back in 2013, there wasn't anything too remarkable for bar takers. It was kind of dominated by the major bar prep companies, and they were not really teaching us how to learn. They would throw books at us, like these giant boxes of books. So after I passed the second attempt, I wanted a one-stop shop for alternative resources and insights and strategies about bar prep that no one was talking about. And for anyone who is new to me, my name is Brian Han. I run Make This Your Last Time. I have a lot of free resources. Thank you guys for joining me here. Together, we'll be gaining a lot of knowledge and insight over the next hour or so.
So the first question is, so I know that we have some people who are taking the bar for the first time. We have some people who are retakers. If you feel comfortable sharing, you can put in the chat if it's your first time or if you're retaking. But Brian also had to take the test more than once, so he passed on his second try. So the question is, what is your lesson that you learned from retaking the bar, and how did you change your strategy the second time around?
I, failed the first time, and I didn't want to be I was like coming out of the exam feeling pretty good, like I'm not going to be a statistic. And then, that's exactly what happened. So I was like, I have to figure out this bar thing. And, I passed the second time in 2014, and, I started Make This Your Last Time, and then, the rest is history. So, what I did was, I tried different things, different strategies. I took a more conscious approach and, kind of went off the beaten path of what Kaplan was telling me to do. And the thing I did the first time, I think, was that, I fixated too much on, rules and theory as opposed to knowing how to use them. I kind of went by the book, watching all the lectures, filling in the notes, every day religiously, 6 hours, 8 hours, consumed everything, checking off assignment boxes, taunting me every day, making sure that they're complete. And I think the most devious part was that, Kaplan gave me a sense of security that, they had it all planned out for me. You're going to be okay. And, all of this overall was exhausting. It was not as fun and productive as tinkering with the past exam questions. I didn't have the energy or the time to do anything else, let alone put in the mental effort that you need to try to solve these past exam questions. And if I had to boil down everything we're going to talk about today, it is that the past will guide your future. So don't be afraid of looking at past exam questions. I know people kind of tend to hide behind lectures and reading outlines and trying to memorize, and those are all needed. They're all required. They're all minimum requirements. But sometimes people tend to get kind of lost in the mass of things that they think they need to do. And what I hope to do today is to kind of identify what moves the needle, so that you can spend your time more wisely in the last month.
I think a lot of times people get stuck on, I need to memorize the rules. I need to memorize the rules. And I know we're going to talk about this more in depth later, but I feel like sometimes people let that it keeps them from like actually doing questions and like really going full force towards the questions. Whereas if you start doing questions, like let's say you start doing essays earlier on, you will start to learn the rules because you learn it as it's applied. And it's not like on the essay, you have to have it word for word exactly correctly. You just have to know how to apply it in a certain situation. So in some ways, I feel like thinking about it as something that you need to memorize can go against like what you actually need to achieve and do on the test. I'm curious if that's something you would agree with.
I would 100% agree with it. That's an excellent insight. I don't really have anything to add to that, actually.
Okay, cool. I was just curious if you agreed. So that's kind of where I was going with that. So, okay, I guess another thing that I would love to ask you, unless there was anything you wanted to add to the last question about lessons learned.
I generally like to suggest to people, not to break the chain, meaning that, do at least something every day that's related to bar prep, even if it's like one MB question. Because
Yeah,
as the moment you stop thinking about bar prep,
yeah,
you lose your momentum. People talk about motivation, which I'll talk about later. Part of that is keeping up the momentum of, kind of being in this bar prep mode. It's, once you have that momentum, you don't really need to rely on motivation from outside sources. So, not breaking the chain, using real MB questions. I think that's a pretty common insight nowadays. So I don't really need to emphasize that. I already hit on, lectures not being as helpful. You can use it as applicable. You don't have to use every single one. It's like when you open a, newspaper, you don't read every single article. You look at what you find interesting, what you need to read.
yeah.
Same like Wikipedia, you don't read the whole article, you kind of pick and choose. And there are like specific strategies as to essays, like issue checking, essay cooking, things like that. I could get into that more. And I guess I would not be afraid to invest in things. One of the things I think that really helped me was booking a room, like a hotel room. It sounds very simple, but I was able to get away from traffic, get away from other people, and just kind of having that own space where I can kind of focus on the whole week. The bar exam is not just 2 days, but it's like the whole week.
Yeah.
So having that space to kind of think about, the essays I'm going to write, things like that, that really helped. So, I mean, those are just kind of some of the basic things that I would say I did specifically differently the second time.
So just to give people a sense, the 3 questions I'll be asking before we move to submitted questions are 3 core principles of bar prep, the 3 components required to pass the bar, and everyone's favorite question based on your responses, how to spend the last month of studying. So that's where we're going to get started. Then we're going to go to some of the submitted questions and Q&A. So let's start with 3 core principles of bar prep.
Okay, so these are things that I believe in when it comes to the bar exam. I can kind of boil it down to 3 things, and you can adopt them as you see fit. So the first one is, bar prep is personal. I say this a lot. You are the dean of your own studies. There's no need to follow the plan that they set out. I know you spent, thousands of dollars, and it might feel like a sunk cost, but your bar review course is just one out of many supplements that will support your self-learning. So, instead of, being pulled in by their pace, there's a lot of indoctrination by these traditional bar review courses. As soon as you step onto campus your first year, they're, telling you, oh, you got to sign up with us. Here's our free, outline and stuff like that. So, try to be more conscious about how you're using those courses. You don't have to listen to every lecture. You can do it if you want to, if you need extra help with it. So, and by now you're like, you can do that? Yeah, I mean, choose your own adventure. You can tweak the schedule to your liking. If it doesn't make sense to, do 3 days of torts because you aced it in law school, maybe you can, do more practice questions or skip the lecture, whatever. Or I know in my case, professional responsibility in California, that tends to be tested a lot. And there was only 1 day devoted to that in the course. So that doesn't make sense to me, in my view. But, of course, I followed it because, I was lost. I didn't know who to listen to. I didn't have something like Make This Your Last Time reminding me, I can choose my own adventure. So that's number 1. Number 2 is to focus on what moves the needle. And, that's kind of a vague statement. So let me just kind of elaborate on that. I know you're saddled with an overwhelming amount of things you need to do. You got these assignment boxes, you got this completion meter, you have a list of things that they tell you need to do. But it's not Themis, it's not your law school, it's not me who is going to decide your fate. I would encourage you to, first of all, kind of think about what you need in order to learn. If you, again, if you're stronger in torts, maybe you don't need to spend tons of time on it. You can use Themis, you can use me as advisors, but you make the ultimate decisions. This whole thing is a self-study endeavor at its core. So, use the big courses to your advantage. Otherwise you're letting them use you for, their statistics and whatnot. That's easier said than done. I also understand kind of the mentality that you're in because I was in your shoes, and this means you kind of have to drive the ship yourself. Face your fears. Don't hide behind lectures and outlines. I know they're very comforting, like a warm blanket. They can help set foundations, especially for first timers. They aren't what really moves the needle. I would say you're probably going to forget like 99% of what you watch on the lectures. And also, we kind of hit on this earlier, don't hide behind perfect memorization. Doreen mentioned that you don't need to recite the rules perfectly.
Yeah.
You're probably good with, buzzwords and just kind of forming the rule statement in a way that shows that you understand it and in a way that you can apply it to the facts. And, listen, I had the most beautiful rule statements in the world when I first took the bar exam. I still look at it. It's like, this is really great. And, I could write really good rules, but, could I use them in an essay? Not really. It's kind of embarrassing kind of looking back on my old essays. It's like, why, I didn't know anything about this. After the first exam, it sort of bothered me that I felt like I knew all this stuff, but didn't know where to put them. I mean, they kind of became irrelevant. Like I didn't know where to put them, kind of like a joke you want to force into a conversation, but you do it and it sounds awkward, And another one is, don't stay stuck in a program that doesn't make sense to you. To be fair, I also didn't know, what the hell was going on. So I just let Kaplan dictate what I was going to do. Will require some courage from your end, kind of conscious thinking, more a deliberate approach. Let's, talk more optimistic. And what should we do to move the needle? First, I want to distinguish optimizing for learning versus optimizing for performance. If you can, you want to optimize for learning first. That means you are more, conscious and judicious about what's helping you learn and retain the material. And, that requires, cutting off what's unnecessary. And, what is unnecessary depends mostly on you. If you don't know yet what is unnecessary, try to proceed as normal. Try different things and, start paying attention to what is working or not over the next 5 days. And you may not have 5 days. So here are some of my suggestions that you can start with. I mean, you're going to hear this, often. It's kind of a theme in this whole thing, So one example thing you can do is testing yourself with a question, check that you actually know how to use it, recalling and reciting the rules, and, dealing with the uncertainty of whether you're using them correctly or whether you're reciting them correctly. And by the way, attempting to recite these things, attempting to recite is actually the basis for all memorization. So you got to keep using them kind of like a muscle. Another thing you could try is trying to focus on issues, like remembering, identifying issues, setting up the issues correctly in an essay. What about being conscious about how you're spending your time? For example, is it a good idea to skip a lecture that Themis is telling you need to do? This will happen often, making errors, getting things wrong, but still pushing on because you are optimistic about the future. You believe in the future. Most of the learning will happen at the tail end. So, trust yourself that you will be able to pick things up. Maybe you want me to save the reality checks for later, but if you end up failing the exam, that is not a big deal. This is pretty common. And yes, a lot of people do also pass the bar, but a lot of people also don't pass the bar. And that just means you have an additional data point that you can work with so you can fix, what you can do the next time. Once you know the truth, you have hope because you can fix it. And if any of you are a repeater, you may not need to rewatch all the lectures, of course. Maybe pick a few topics that you struggled with in the past. And, generally with all this, I steer away from passive learning activities, like watching lectures, reading outlines. Those are good baseline activities to do, maybe in the beginning, set yourself up with foundations, but, those are not things you want to do in the last month of studying, especially. So you want to lean toward doing things that, you will be doing on the exam itself, which is answering questions correctly and solving, problems. And, again, you'll notice that these things generally, require facing your inner fears, and it's okay to feel scared. It is scary, and it's okay to feel stupid. It's part of the process. If you're not feeling stupid, you're not learning. Embarrassment is the best way to learn a lesson. Don't let the exam be the learning experience. Just fail now, fail often. Get things wrong, and hopefully you will get things wrong less on the exam.
I just want to say quickly, so we've just talked about a lot of different things. I think my takeaway is, because I think sometimes people might hear what you say and it might seem like overwhelming, like, okay, if I'm not following my bar prep program, what am I doing? And that could be like a whole nother webinar on its own. So I think what I want to share based on what you've said is, because you were saying like I had the perfect rule statements, this, that, and like still was not able to pass despite all of that. Like you really put in the work. It wasn't that you weren't putting in the work. Even if you have the rule in front of you. Forget having it memorized. Let's say you have the rule in front of you. You have like, let's say you're using Convisor mini review and you're like referring back to it as you're doing a question, you can still get the question wrong. And the reason is because just because you have the information doesn't mean you know how to apply that information to the facts. So I think my takeaway from everything that you've said so far is just the fact that you want to experiment, see what works for you, see what makes you understand things a little bit better, and stick to that. Like if you feel like something is working for you, if you come up with an idea or you see something somewhere that someone says and you try it and it works for you, just keep going. There's no one right way to do this. It's not that your bar prep course is a bad thing. It's just that if you feel like you have to do every last thing and follow it to the T, and you think that's what's going to help you pass, that's where you can get, sometimes it can become a little bit more difficult. And I think that was Brian's experience.
Well, I just want to reiterate that that's very much true. There's a million ways to pass the exam. On Friday, I sent that story about Karina, who said she broke the rules and she, passed magnificently. So, I did want to emphasize the rule statement thing because people are worried about memorization. To put it another way, just because you have the rule, like the words on they're just words on the page, doesn't mean you know how to use them. You don't really know what it means until you actually try to apply it to the facts. And, reading the model answers, sample answers will kind of teach you how to do that.
Brian, are you okay if we skip over to how to spend the last month of studying? Because I know that's what everyone wants to hear.
Oh, sure.
Let's skip to that. If we have time, we'll come back to the second question. But I want to prioritize the questions people have submitted and how to spend the last month of studying, because I know that's people want to hear that.
Okay. Let's
do it. So how do we spend the last month of studying? How do we maximize our time to help make us more likely to pass?
Okay, so I was not sure how to answer this one, even though it was the most popular question, because it really depends on you and where you are, your background, how much you've already studied. But I'll try to speak in more general terms that might apply to most people here. So despite what I said earlier, if you're taking Barbary or Themis, they finally throw you into the deep end of the pool after like 7 weeks of casually floating in the shallow end. So you basically feel like you have to cram now. And well, passive study time is over. So now it's the time to kind of, hopefully this lecture will kind of help you get into that mode. And just as well, because time constraints force us to be more creative and efficient with our time. So how are we going to do this? What's that going to look like? Again, that's mostly grinding through past exam questions and checking your work against the answers. So the second part is actually really important. Just because you do the questions doesn't mean you're learning anything. You're practicing answering the question, which is great. But how are you going to know if you did it right, if you did it wrong? So I sometimes compare it to getting on the scale. Like practicing is getting on the scale, getting the reading of where you are. And then what you do in between readings is, kind of checking your answers and kind of tweaking things around. So I do have a graphic about this. I kind of call this the practice and feedback loop. And we will be sending you a handout after this, and it will have the graphic. But basically, it means you study first a little bit. You review the outlines, you attend the lecture. Whatever you need to do to have a base level of understanding of the subjects, the issues, the rules, and then you actually attempt the question. You might get things wrong. You probably will get a lot of things wrong. Oh, there you go. And then afterwards, you kind of check to see, you review the model answers to see what happened. I don't know if any of you guys are interested in artificial intelligence. It's very much the rage right now, but this is exactly how you train an AI. As a patent attorney, I kind of deal with AI, like the inner workings of all that. And I had to learn, like I take a course on it and all that. But this is basically how to train an AI. You try things, you detect the error, and then you try to minimize the error. So that's what you want to do to train your own AI. Hopefully every day you are doing some MBE questions. It doesn't have to be 30, 50, 100. It's more about, how well you're doing the questions, not about how many you're doing. If you're learning from doing one question, I will commend that over someone who does like 100 and doesn't remember anything. And, people sometimes forget about the PT. So do at least one performance test from now until July, 1 or 2, ideally 1 per week, or maybe 1 per Tuesday, to check that you're actually doing okay, because it tends to be a pretty large part of your score. And if you forget it, then, I've seen people who could have passed if they had done a little better on the PT. And to save time in July, you can also try outlining only the issues and the rules on an essay. I talk about, or people talk about something called essay cooking, which is a name that has stuck for some reason. It has nothing to do with culinary activities. It just means that you focus on the issues and the rules of an essay, because those are the key parts of an essay. By now, you probably know how to apply the rules to the facts. You probably know, how to do analysis and stuff like that. And if you know how to do that, then kind of doing that over and over again may not be the best use every time, over focusing on being able to identify issues and recite the rules. So that should save you at least half the time. For example, California essays are 1 hour. So doing this essay cooking activity should take you, 10, 15 minutes to write it out. And then another 10 to 15 minutes checking against the sample answers to make sure you got the issues.
Can I pause you right there? Because I think a
Yes.
lot of people were curious about this. Okay, so essay cooking is something that I think, Brian, a lot of people come to your website for that question, right? They're really curious about essay cooking specifically.
I do get some questions about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say from my own experience, like I think I learned about essay cooking from your website, and just the name makes you want to know, like, what is this? What does this mean? And I know you just covered it and you just said what it is, but I think just the idea about it is,
Mhm.
the more essays you do, I mean, again, it's not just about how many, but the more essays you do and you practice looking to see what the issue is, how the issue is used, which rule associates with it, and things like that, I think the easier it becomes and the more experience you have and the better you get at it, as long as you're not rushing through, right? But I think the point is, as long as you have the skills of being able to like analyze and write your conclusion and stuff like that, as long as you have that foundational part down, you don't need to necessarily practice that. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Brian. I'm just sharing my take on it, and I want to hear if that's what it is. But I think the idea is, like, if you have that, then you have it. It's not like you have to rememorize how to analyze something, right? Or how to apply it. So you can do that, you have that skill. But the part where you like are able to find the issue and then write out the rule and remember it enough to write it out, those are the parts where usually we tend to need more practice on. So if you can spend 15 minutes doing that and 15 minutes reviewing, you can do more essays. And the analysis part, you should practice for sure as well, but you probably won't need to practice it for every single essay. You should practice it for a few essays until you feel comfortable with it, and then you don't need to do it necessarily every single time.
Yes, exactly. That's a great summary. And as you do more essays, as you cover more essays, the more you'll gain an intuition about which issues and rules are most important, because you'll see them come up more and more. So it becomes like this natural way to kind of solidify the important parts and kind of deprioritize what's not as important.
Yeah.
So, another thing about another disadvantage is that they give you every single rule that you might need to know, but you actually don't need to know every rule or every issue. Yes, sometimes you will see something that has never been tested before. But the majority of the issues and the rules that you're going to have to wrestle with have already been tested, have come up a lot. So just exposing yourself to as many issue identification exercises and rule recitation exercises will eventually just become very second nature. And the other good thing about having these summaries, like these skeletal outlines, you can write it down, carry it to your hotel room, and review just those issues and rule statements. And instead of just reading through the whole like sample answers, you just have like this little booklet or packet of just like these issue outlines that you can quickly review before the essay day. So that is another advantage that I had for the second time.
Also, Brian, another thing I want to ask you as a follow-up is, would you say that the essays, or I mean, I'm sure the MBE is also too, but thinking about the essays, like it's in some ways it's a little formulaic, right? Like once you expose yourself to enough of them, like really going through it and analyzing it thoroughly to understand it, and the way that it's like the way that they create it, the way that they think about like the facts that they put in that you then need to use for your issues, like the more time you spend doing that, you start to pick up patterns and it becomes easier.
Yes, just as there are fact patterns, there are issue patterns as well.
Yeah,
So the more you do these essays, the more you'll recognize, oh, if I see this, I'm going to do this. I'm going to put
yeah,
these issues clumped together. And just to add a caveat to that, it is true that IRAC is mechanical, but that's not the whole story. So each subject and each issue has its own way of being solved. So just because you think in your head, oh, it's just IRAC, doesn't mean that it's always going to look exactly the same. Contracts, for example, you always want to state the applicable law. That's like a very basic thing everyone knows. And for Civ Pro, personal jurisdiction, you go through the the long arm statute, the basic, whatever, the constitutional analysis, international shoe. So that has a very specific issue pattern. So just knowing the issue pattern will help you greatly, and essay cooking rather is a way to get through more questions than you would have otherwise, just kind of writing out whole essays.
Have we covered everything that we want to talk about in terms of the last month of studying?
I do also want to maybe give you a picture of what the last 4 weeks could look like in terms of
Yes,
schedule.
please.
Would that help you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry, I muted myself a little too early, but yes, definitely, I think that's something that a lot of people have had questions about, and I think that seeing that, yes, someone wrote in the chat, yes, please, that would be awesome.
Okay, so the first thing I want to mention is that some people tend to hit the subjects in order, and then the first week is subject 1, second week is subject 2, and so on, until they hit week 10 is subject 10, and then they forget everything about subjects 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you want to prevent that, right? So I like to think in terms of cycles with shorter durations of each subject. So for example, taking the last 4 weeks left, we can probably fit in 2 cycles. And I'll start from the end. The second cycle will be you grinding through maybe 2 to 3 subjects per day. You could be cooking essays, and you could be doing MBE questions as usual. And in the remaining time, the first cycle could be 1 or 2 days per subject. Day 1 could be maybe doing some light review about the subject, and then just kind of diving into the questions and trying to figure out what you did right and what you did wrong. And then day 2, if you need the day 2, you could be doing some more of that, the same thing. And kind of throughout, you could sprinkle in a few performance tests every Tuesday. So take that into account. Maybe even add a buffer day or 2, or like a rest day. Sometimes life happens, things happen. Maybe you need extra time, maybe you need to catch up. So just kind of adding in that buffer will kind of help you not feel as overwhelmed. And I think these schedules should be a flexible living document, meaning that it doesn't have to be a rigid structure like the Themis gives you. It's your own personal document that is guiding you. You're not a slave to it. It's something that guides you. You're going to be the one using it. So I would think about having, like a Word document, don't save it to a PDF, just have a Word document. I like to do like a calendar format. Some people do like a list, like a table. Whatever you do, just kind of think about doing it in cycles. So you should be hitting any given subject maybe twice from here on, first cycle and the second cycle. Does that give you some ideas?
I think some people are understanding it. And someone's asking, what about full practice tests?
Full practice tests. Yeah, those could be useful if you feel like you need to practice your stamina. I don't think it's necessary, but some people have like these full 200 question MBE assessment tests. Those could be helpful. It's really up to you. I don't really require it or recommend it necessarily if you feel that you are pretty good at the stamina aspect of it. But feel free to do it. If you have the Emmanuel Strategies and Tactics book, that has a 200 question exam at the end of it. So that could be something you want to fit in if you want to. Again, you are the dean of your own studies. You set the curriculum. And I don't have an answer that you need to follow necessarily. So I will say that it is a choice that you can make. It's not required. It could be helpful if you need stamina. So hopefully that gives you some direction.
Brian, just because we've talked about the cycles before and I did find it helpful, let's maybe just recap it. So the way that you were explaining it to me and the way that I understood it, and maybe there's a little bit of a gap for me as well, is the initial phase is focusing on specific topics one at a time and trying to get really good at each topic. The second phase is a little bit more like overlap and mixing things up. Like maybe, is that correct so far or no? So
the second phase would be almost entirely practicing the questions.
Okay.
That's how you fit in 2 to 3 subjects, and using essay cooking, for example.
Okay.
So that should allow you to fit in 2 to 3 subjects, and also review time. And also I just want to just kind of mention that this is for people who have already done, the first 6 weeks of their course or their own self-study. If you are just starting now, it's going to look a little different probably. You probably want to do more review in that case, looking at outlines and things like that. But assuming that you have gone through the course or whatever you're doing right now, you probably have a good amount of knowledge. So, again, as I said, passive studying time is over. It's time to kind of shift more towards using what you think you know and checking that you got it right and what you got wrong.
Okay, so in terms of the submitted questions, the one that I want to hit on, if we do answer just one, it's about memorization. And we've talked about it, but I think it's still helpful to talk about it. So the few questions that people submitted are help with rule mastery. Everyone insists you must memorize, but what if you can't just memorize all the rules? How do you get around it? How am I ever going to memorize all of this? Why did I think this was a good idea? That was my favorite one. And there's a few others, but I think you wrote out a few answers to these, so I'm curious if there's anything you want to share here.
So memorization is definitely a hot topic. It is, I would say, one of the top two fears of bar takers. The first one being trying to finish lectures. And I mean, it is not unfounded. It is something that is required, but it is also table stakes. It is a minimum requirement. It's just a cost of admission. Everyone's doing it. So it's not something to be so obsessed about, so worried about. You will be doing it naturally as you solve the questions. So, with that in
Yes.
mind, I guess I'll reiterate that you don't need to memorize everything. And no one ever gets a perfect score on the bar exam. So, everyone fails to some extent. So what you want to do is try to fail less over time. That's what
Yes.
passers do. They just fail less. And the other thing I want to emphasize is to memorize the issues. People are always talking about memorizing the rules, but if you don't know the issues, then you have nowhere to put them. So be able to identify them based on the facts. People have used APR sheets for that. I recently got a comment about how it's saving their life, and I was like, oh, I'm very flattered. And these issues can serve as trigger words too. Like, let's say you see a paragraph and you see that it's negligence per se. There's a statute. So now from that phrase negligence per se, you might be able to just kind of remember automatically what negligence per se is about. That comes from practice too. But just having the issues as a guidepost or like a street sign kind of lets you know which corresponding rule should be used.
Can I
And
pause you there really quick?
yes.
I'm just gonna say that I don't think I've heard that advice before of like memorizing the issue rather than the rule.
It's not rather, it's also issues and
It
rules.
was okay.
Yeah.
But it's just like a different way of thinking about it that I don't think I have. And someone's asking if you can elaborate the difference between the two. But I think that's I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about that as well.
Okay, so memorizing issue, I mean, that's just when you memorize the rule, it's just like, oh, battery is intentional, whatever. I don't know what it is, but memorizing rule just means battery. Just remember what battery is.
Yeah.
But also just kind of knowing what issues could be tested within the subject. So within the topic of torts, there's negligence. And then within the umbrella of negligence, there's duty, there's breach, there's negligence per se. So these subtopics, which you will need to also analyze in the essay, because you don't want to just put down negligence and then the rule for negligence and have one paragraph and then that's it. You also want to break it down into sub issues. So knowing those sub issues, those nuances, exceptions, defenses, things like that, just being aware of what those issues are will definitely help you set up the issues, definitely help you earn more points on the essays, and probably do well in the MBE as well, because the MBE tends to test very specific nuances, exceptions, and things like that. And from what I hear, it's getting tougher and tougher. So that's another reason to make this your last time as soon as possible, so you don't have to take harder exams like next year or whatever.
The other question that came up a lot is mindset, including, okay, just generally like how to have a winning mindset for the exam. And also someone who said like, I failed 4 times. How do I have any confidence? I think, and I also just want to tell everyone who's here, the reason why we're covering something like this is because I think it's underrated, like talking about mindset. I think if you have the wrong mindset, it's very hard to pass. So.
That is true. People have told me that, the mind is 50% of the exam. So I don't think a lot of people know about this, but I actually have a mini course dedicated to, managing your mindset and organizing your emotions. These difficult emotions that come up during the bar exam. It's called Mental Engines. You can find it on my product page. But, just to kind of talk about the person who failed 4 times, how do you have any confidence? That is a tough question. It really sucks to fail 4 times. I wouldn't know because I have not failed 4 times, but failing just once was pretty bad. I understand the need to feel some optimism. Something needs to change if you fail 4 times. Hopefully this discussion is helping in some way, because you don't get this information easily. There's a lot of commonly spoken tactics and things like that, but how do you exactly do it? It's not very inspiring either. But I guess what I'll say to someone who's failed 4 times is, think about what needs to change. Think about how to become better at these tasks. Confidence is not just going to, that's not what wins you the game. And you can't really rely on that. It's competence that will win you the game. And competence will actually lead to confidence. So it's actually backwards. You don't get confidence and then become better. You become better and then you become confident because of that. So confidence is based on evidence, and I would encourage you to develop that evidence for yourself.
One other thing that you wrote, can I just read something that you wrote that I really liked?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay, so someone asked the question about like, how do you know you're ready on the day of the test or like beforehand? And Brian wrote, you're calm and in a state of acceptance from knowing you've done your best, but it feels like you're not fully ready. If you feel fully ready, I don't want to scare people. It says you probably aren't. That's okay. You just need to be good enough. But I think the takeaway is just like, if you don't feel fully ready, that's totally fine. As long as you've done what you can to memorize as much as you can, there's no way that you're going to memorize every last thing.
But I know most people are trying their best. They're trying very hard. And so I have hope that people will be in a state of readiness by the end of July, just by virtue of how hard people are working. But just going back to the story I told in the beginning, hard work is just you also need smart work too, right? Just because you're kind of spinning your wheels doing all this work doesn't mean you're going to move forward. So hopefully, part of the purpose of this discussion is to kind of give you ideas and strategies that you may not have thought about that you might want to consider. That if you don't like it, that's okay too. It may not be for you. But if you do think, hey, this could be actually useful, then that could be something that kind of changes the game for you, and hopefully it does. So yeah, just smart work, hard work, and that should, again, the last couple of weeks as you grind through the practice questions, that's where you're gonna get the intuition, the sense of what to do. So I do believe that you will be okay by that time. But if just because you think you're going to be okay doesn't mean you are going you kind of have to put in the work too. So hopefully that's a measured enough answer. I don't want to just be all unicorns rolling down the hill kind of optimism, but also you gotta kind of do the work also.
For sure. I'm sure. Yeah. I think everyone knows that for sure that the one thing you have to do for this bar exam is put in the work, or else there's no way. There's a lot of questions on the side. We also have Aaron raising his hand. I'll let Aaron ask, and then we'll go to some of the questions on the side here.
Thank you. Hi, Brian. I've gone through the subjects twice already last month. And last month, I would wake up, I would be in the chair from 9 in the morning and do 3 hours of MBE questions and reviewing everything you're saying, right? And then later on, I would do review for the essays. So I just heard you saying to try to do 3. So, and could you explain to me for the last month, if I am for a specific day, if I'm reviewing 3 questions, what does that day look like?
Are you talking about 3 subjects per day or questions?
Yeah, yeah. If I'm doing 3 subjects per day for the last month, how does that day look like?
Okay, so for example, so this is going to be the final cycle. Let's say week before the exam, week and a half before the exam, assuming you have 13, 16 subjects to go through. So that's like a week and a half. So day 1 could look like, let's say you want to hit on torts, contracts, and real property, for example, or just torts and contracts. So you'll pull out questions, past exam questions from whichever bar that you're taking, organize maybe like 4 to 10 questions per subject, and then you basically just go through them. You don't have to answer the questions in entirety. Again, essay cooking will help you cut down on that time. Just outline the issues and the rules. You might want to maybe do 1 full essay just to make sure that you know how to do it still. But for the most part, you want to be grinding through all these essays and comparing your work against the sample answers or the model answers. Compare which issues you got, which rules you got. So that's about 30 minutes max per essay. So I don't know if the 3 hours you mentioned in the beginning is your time limit, but let's say you do 4 essays or 6 essays per subject. That's already like 3 hours per subject, 6 hours total for the essays. And then maybe for the last 2 hours of the day, you kind of do some MBE questions, maybe 30 or 50. 30 MBE questions should take you about 1 hour, and another hour to review the answers and check that you got it right. So that's like an example day that you could try to do. And again, it is a flexible approach. If you feel like you're very confident in torts, then maybe you can cram it with another subject you're confident in. Let's say you're really good at evidence. So you could pair torts, evidence, and then real property if you're like kind of iffy on that one. So that could be a way you could fit in 3 subjects. But if you have wills and trust, you're not really good at it. Professional responsibility, that's like a pretty big subject. So maybe those you want to maybe spend one day doing 2 subjects instead. So you kind of mix and match. Does that kind of make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you, Brian.
Great.
Okay, Brian, we have a few more questions and not a lot of time, so let's do a speed round. Do you think it is okay to study the day before?
Yes.
Okay. We'll leave it at that. I agree. And as maybe a follow-up, but also slightly different question. Someone asked, what do you do about burnout? How do you deal with burnout?
Take a break.
Okay, I'm going to expand on that. The answer I would say is I recommend taking like a day off per week, or maybe at least half the day off per week, so that you can just process and not feel guilty when you take that time off.
Building in a buffer day kind of helps you prevent
Yes.
like, oh, I missed a day kind of thing. And just be sure that it is actually burnout. Like if you and also try to do something related to bar prep, 1 MB question. And afterwards, if you feel like doing more, then do more. That's kind of the issue with motivation, right? You don't feel like it, but then once you start doing it, you kind of feel like doing more. So do 1 MB question. If you don't want to do it anymore, take the rest of the day off guilt-free. If you feel like doing more, keep doing more.
Someone asked, how many hours would you suggest doing per day?
I don't know, 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours. It's really up to you.
It's really hard to say. Are you working full time? How much time have you been spent studying? Like, there's a lot of different factors to think about. I would say you should know yourself from all the schooling you've been through up to this point in your life. And you can say based off of that, what is your max that you can still be productive? And it might change over time, right? When you first start studying, maybe you can only focus for an hour at a time. But you do that hour and you push yourself to maybe do an hour and a half, and you build your stamina, because you're going to need that stamina on the day of the test. So it's not necessarily how many hours, it's more that as long as you're being effective, just keep going.
I do want to build on that.
Yeah.
The thing that I wanted to mention somewhere in this talk is that it's not really time that's your most valuable resource. It's your mental bandwidth, your attention. So anyone can, at this level of education, can find and create time for yourself. But if you have kids running around, if you have like distracting things going on, even if you have 3 hours, 6 hours, if you're not paying attention to what you're doing, if you're not focusing, that's kind of useless, dead time, So try to think about how you can find focus and attention and mental bandwidth in your day.
Yeah, and not to get discouraged if you feel like you're not able to focus for as long as you want. That's very normal, especially in the beginning. It'll come as you keep doing it and you get better.
If you count Monday as the day before, you can do a little bit of light studying. For example, you can review the essays that you've cooked. That shouldn't take you very long. But most of Monday should actually, I recommend dedicating to logistics, like traveling, getting your food arranged, make sure you have everything you need for test day, and you're scoping out the test center. The only thing that should be new to you on Tuesday is the questions themselves, ideally.
So I think we're going to wrap up here. Thank you guys so much for joining today. I think, Brian, you wanted to ask feedback from the audience?
Yeah, I was just curious just how you guys are feeling and what's the most important thing you learned from this?
If you have one takeaway that you took from today, we would be curious to hear in the chat. But a huge thank you to Brian for doing this. He told me himself that, and he's very humble, but he was telling me that he had a lot going on with work at this time, but he prioritized this and spent hours preparing for this. So a huge thank you to you, Brian, for doing this.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I do want to give you a special shout out just because you're also a July bar taker and you have spent hours with me. You have accommodated me very well, just because I want to be prepared for this. And so I'm really grateful for the opportunity to meet, you and some of you for the first time, some of my longtime readers, and maybe new members of the community over video. So, thank you. So, I mean, that's all I have to say. If you want to learn more about me, it's makethisyourlasttime.com. And I'll turn it over to you, Doreen, just for
Yeah.
any final comments, questions, complaints.
Final comments, I just want to say, so you can find anything that I'm doing. I'm called Before You Take the LSAT on all platforms, including Spotify. We have interviews with like the former GC of Apple talking about his career path and people talking about their career path in general within law. Look out for the email coming from Brian. He's going to share answering your questions. For everyone who joined today, I know it's a really stressful time. I hope that you continue to stay positive and just push forward, look for the little wins, and don't get overwhelmed with how much information there is. Just think about the one step in front of you. And yeah, I think we're all in this together. So someone wrote, you don't have to pass, you just have to fail less. Is that what you said, Brian, also? feel
Yeah,
like
I
you said
think they're
something like
sharing
that.
I think they're sharing the takeaways.
Right. Okay, yes. You don't have to pass, you just have to fail less. That's really all it is. Small wins, just keep moving forward. It's just break it down into pieces.
I like this one comment someone said, I'm
Yeah.
right on schedule, and even though I feel like the bar is attacking me, I can fight back. So it's Amy.
Yes.
So yeah, that's great to hear.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is Tamara. I just wanted to say I've been working with Brian's materials. I am not trying to advertise for him, but I think, Brian, one of the most critical things I've learned from you is in your YouTube video about what you assumed about bar essays might be wrong and the inverted IRAC. And then focusing on attacking the issues by looking at a list of what issues are available and then applying them rather than trying to come up with the issues out of your own mind. I don't know if you could talk about that briefly, but the APRA sheets are excellent for that. Basically, you have a list of issues that you run through as a checklist as you're doing your essay. So you can say, does this apply? Does this apply? Does this apply? Rather than trying to find them from memory.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. One of the things that helped me pass the second time. So maybe I should have talked about it more.
That's okay.
Yeah, she's talking about issue checking. So people talk in terms of issue spotting a lot. And to me, that's sort of a random process of just kind of pulling issues out of the air. You just kind of know when you see it. But I think that sets you up to kind of miss some of the more smaller ones. You can spot the more obvious ones just by looking at it. But if you know what issues are going to be tested and which issues might come up for this subject, then you can kind of go through a more systematic process of, this fact means these issues could show up, and you just kind of go through and make sure that they do apply, maybe they don't. So in that way, you can scrape more points by covering the exceptions, the defenses, and it's at least a reminder to yourself to at least kind of hit the the things you should be doing. For contracts, it's applicable law. For California community property, it's that little blurb at the beginning. So yeah, issue checking is definitely something you might want to consider. Whoever signs up for my emails, I do include a link to that article, so hopefully people have seen it already.
Someone had a question about typing versus handwriting, if you recommend one versus the other.
I mean, I like typing.
Yeah.
If you like to handwrite, then that's up to you. I think
Okay.
typing lets you kind of edit your paper more flexibly. You can copy and paste, move things around. I do like handwriting the outlines, the essay outlines before you actually type up the answer.
That's a good, I wouldn't have thought. Yeah, so yeah, that makes sense. So you're not necessarily typing that part, but you can do it on your paper.
Yeah, it's just like a quick sketch,
Yeah. So thank you guys all so much for joining and trusting us that this would be helpful to you, and it hopefully gave you something to help you improve and get closer to passing. So good luck everyone studying. Thank you again to Brian, and that's it.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it.